The citadel of Aurealis rose high into the sky like a mountain of crystal and light. From far away it looked perfect and unshakable. Inside, however, there was a problem that no one had been able to solve. The twin daughters of the alien Empress could not sleep. Night after night their cries echoed in the royal chambers. They tossed in their soft beds made of shining fibers. They shivered even when the air was warm. The greatest healers came, the priests chanted their songs, and the most skilled engineers built devices that hummed and glowed. Yet nothing worked. The Empress was powerful, feared by her enemies and respected by her people, but she was helpless when her daughters wept through the night. She longed to see them rest, but each sunrise brought the same tired eyes and trembling voices. In the lower parts of the citadel, far below the crystal towers, a man worked quietly. His name was Daniel. He was a janitor, a human from Earth. His life was not grand. He swept the endless halls, polished the reflective floors, and replaced broken lights. He did what others did not notice, keeping the great palace shining. Daniel had come from a life of pain. His wife had passed away years ago, leaving him with his young son, Ethan. To provide for him, Daniel had taken a job in the Empire, far from his home world. He was not a soldier, not a scientist, not a leader. He was a father, and all that mattered to him was raising his boy as best as he could. Daniel often thought about the nights back on Earth when Ethan was younger. There were times his son could not sleep, frightened of storms or strange noises. Daniel would stay by his side, telling him simple stories, humming soft tunes and making sure he felt safe. Those nights had shaped him into the father he was, one who understood the small fears of children better than many others. Though he wore the plain uniform of a janitor, he carried with him quiet strength. One evening, Daniel was working near the upper levels of the palace. He polished the golden handrails of a staircase when he heard a faint sound. At first he thought it was the wind, but as he paused he realized it was crying. The sound was soft at first, but it grew louder as it echoed down the long halls. He knew at once that it was the sound of children. His heart tightened, for it reminded him of Ethan's cries on lonely nights. He looked around. The guards were stiff, standing in their positions. The advisors whispered among themselves, but no one moved to help. To them, it was not their place to act. To Daniel, it was impossible to ignore. He gripped the handle of his mop, thinking carefully. If he stepped into the royal chamber without permission, he could be punished, perhaps even executed. But he could not walk away from the sound of children in fear. His own son had taught him that no child, no matter how powerful their family, should be left alone when they needed comfort. His heart spoke louder than his fear. Slowly, he walked toward the sound. When Daniel reached the great doors of the chamber, he paused. The doors were taller than any building he had seen on Earth, carved with symbols of the Empire. He raised his hand and knocked gently, a soft tap that seemed too small for such massive doors. For a moment, there was silence. Then, without warning, the doors shifted and opened slightly. No guard stopped him. No voice told him to leave. With careful steps he entered. The chamber glowed with the light of crystals hanging like stars from the ceiling. At the center, the Empress sat on her throne, her crown shining like the sun. Around her stood advisors in robes and armor, all watching closely. Near the throne were two small beds where the twin princesses, Lyra and Selene, lay restless. Their faces were wet with tears, and their little hands clutched the sheets. Their cries filled the air, heavy and painful. The moment Daniel stepped in, the advisors turned sharply. Some shouted that a janitor had no place there. Others demanded he be removed at once. But before the guards could move, Lyra looked up. Through her tears, she whispered to her mother that the man made her feel calm. Selene nodded, holding her sister's hand. The Empress raised her hand and the room fell silent. She studied Daniel, her sharp eyes glowing with power. He bowed his head low, showing respect. Daniel did not speak to the Empress first. He walked slowly toward the twins, kneeling so his eyes were at their level. His voice was quiet and soft, the same voice he once used for Ethan on stormy nights. He told them that when his son could not sleep, he would sit by him, tell him simple stories, and stay until fear went away. The girls listened. Their cries grew softer, their breathing slower. The advisors looked uneasy, but the Empress gave no order to stop him. Daniel reached into his bag. Among his cleaning tools was a small, worn book. It was a children's book, from Earth, one he had kept close even when he traveled across the stars. He opened it carefully and began to read. The story was simple, about a child who faced the darkness with kindness and courage. His voice carried the words gently, filling the chamber not with power, but with warmth. Lyra's eyelids grew heavy. Celine's small hands relaxed. Their breathing evened out, and within minutes both were asleep. Their faces were calm, their tears gone. The chamber grew silent, not from fear, but from peace. Daniel closed the book and set it aside. For the first time in many nights, the princesses rested. The Empress sat still, her eyes on her daughters. She had seen battles won, planets conquered, and enemies fall at her command. Yet she had never seen her daughters sleep so peacefully. She looked at the human janitor with a new expression, not of anger, but of thought. Her advisors shifted uneasily, unable to explain what had just happened. No healer, no priest, no machine had succeeded. Yet this man, with nothing but a book and a calm voice, had done it. Daniel stood slowly, keeping his eyes low in respect. He expected to be punished for his boldness. Instead, there was only silence. He turned to leave, his heart full of both fear and relief. As he stepped out of the chamber, he thought of Ethan, sleeping in their small quarters. He smiled faintly, knowing that tonight, 2 more children would rest as his son did. The palace remained quiet. The twin princesses dreamed softly, unaware that their peace had begun not with magic or machines, but with the love and courage of a single human father. The night after Daniel had read the story, the palace felt different. There was no crying echoing through the long halls. The twin princesses Lyra and Celine slept deeply. Their peaceful breaths filled the royal chamber instead of restless sobs. The Empress sat silently near their beds for hours watching them sleep. She remembered the countless nights when healers tried their chants, when machines glowed with calming light, when priests sang until their voices broke. None of it had worked. Yet a human janitor with a worn book and a gentle voice had succeeded. The image stayed in her mind until dawn. By morning, whispers had already spread through the palace. Servants told each other in hushed voices about the human man who had entered the royal chamber without being punished. Guards spoke of how the Empress had not ordered his removal. Advisors argued quietly in corners, worried that it showed weakness. Some thought the Empress might even favor this man, but Daniel knew none of this. He had returned to his quarters with Ethan, his son, and continued his work the next day as if nothing had changed. For him, the moment had only been about the children, not about power. Later that evening, the twins asked for him again. They told their mother that they wanted to see the human who had helped them. The Empress, though unsure, gave the order. Guards found Daniel as he worked on fixing a light in one of the long corridors. He looked surprised when they told him the princesses requested his presence. His heart raced with worry, thinking he had done something wrong the night before. Still, he followed them, holding Ethan's hand as he walked through the glowing halls. When Daniel entered the chamber, Lyra and Celine's eyes lit up. They ran to him without fear, their small hands tugging at his uniform. The advisors looked shocked at the boldness of the princesses. The Empress sat silently, watching every move. Daniel bowed and greeted them with respect, then let Ethan step forward. The boy stood shyly, hiding partly behind his father's leg. But the princesses crouched near him, smiling, asking his name. Ethan whispered softly, "Ethan." And slowly, he warmed to them. Daniel noticed that the twins still showed signs of fear when the night grew deeper. Their eyes darted to the corners of the chamber as if they expected shadows to move, so he decided to try something different. He dimmed the bright crystal lights and pulled a small lamp closer to the wall. He showed the children how to place their hands in front of the lamp to make shapes appear on the wall. Simple shapes at first, a bird, a rabbit, a dog. The princesses laughed, their voices breaking the heavy air. Ethan joined in, making a clumsy shape that made them laugh harder. For a while, the fear in their eyes faded, replaced with joy. The Empress leaned forward on her throne, her sharp eyes fixed on the scene. She noticed how Daniel spoke to the girls gently, never treating them as royalty but as children. He never bowed after every word, nor did he use titles. He simply cared for them the same way he cared for his son. She realized that it was this difference that made her daughters feel safe. Everyone else in the palace looked at them with fear, duty, or awe. Only Daniel looked at them with kindness. That night, when it was time for bed, Lyra and Selene were calmer. Daniel suggested something he often did with Ethan, breathing slowly, pretending they were blowing up balloons with their stomachs. The princesses copied him, giggling at first but soon breathing deeply. Their little bodies relaxed. Within minutes they were asleep. The Empress had seen it with her own eyes again. It was not chance. It was not luck. It was something only he knew how to do. The advisors grumbled after Daniel left the chamber. They told the Empress that allowing a janitor into the royal family's private space was dangerous. They said it lowered the honor of the empire. They demanded that she end this strange practice. But the Empress silenced them with a look. She had seen her daughter sleep, and no voice of fear or pride could outweigh that. In her heart she knew she would not let the twins return to sleepless nights. As days passed, Daniel and Ethan were called to the royal chamber again and again. Each time he used simple tricks, reading, telling stories, showing games, teaching them little songs. Each night the twins fell asleep with smiles on their faces. Their laughter filled the palace, and soon the servants began to notice. They whispered that the palace felt brighter now, as if joy itself had returned to its halls. But outside the chamber, the world looked at it differently. Ambassadors who visited the citadel began to hear rumors. They found it strange that the mighty Empress, who ruled over many worlds, allowed a human janitor to comfort her daughters. Some scoffed, thinking it showed weakness. Others feared it meant the Empress was changing. They could not see what she saw, that her daughters were healing. One evening, after the twins had fallen asleep, the Empress asked Daniel to stay. The advisors had left and the guards stood far from earshot. She looked at him for a long moment before speaking. She asked why he had stepped into her chamber that first night, knowing he could have been killed. Daniel did not hide the truth. He told her he could not walk away from children in pain. He said that his son had taught him how heavy it was to watch a child cry without comfort. His voice was steady, not proud but full of honesty. The Empress felt a stir in her chest, something she had not felt in years. She had faced wars, betrayals, and endless duties. She had always been strong. But in this man's simple words, she saw another kind of strength. Not the strength of soldiers or rulers, but the strength of a parent who would not let fear stop him from protecting a child. From that night, the Empress treated Daniel differently. She did not speak of it before others, but she allowed him closer to her daughters than anyone else. Lyra and Selene adored him, and they adored Ethan too. The three children became inseparable during those visits. They laughed, played, and learned together. For the first time, the princesses knew what it felt like to have a friend who did not see them as royalty, only as children. The palace was changing, and the Empress knew it. Her daughters were stronger, happier, and calmer. The air itself felt lighter. And all of it had begun because a human janitor had listened to his heart on one restless night. The palace of Aurealis began to feel alive in ways it had not for many months. Since Daniel and Ethan had started visiting the twin princesses each night, laughter and calmness replaced the sounds of fear and sleepless cries. Servants smiled more often. Guards spoke in lighter tones, and even the long crystal halls seemed brighter. Yet outside the palace walls, rumors traveled fast. In markets and in distant courts, people whispered about the strange human janitor who had done what no healer, priest, or machine could do. Many doubted it. Others mocked it. Still, the story spread. Daniel himself did not think much about the whispers. Each day he continued his work. He polished the crystal floors, repaired glowing lamps, and made sure the vast palace remained spotless. He was humble and quiet. For him, the joy came from seeing Lyra and Selene laugh, from watching Ethan smile as he played with his new friends. That was enough for him. He did not seek honor or power. He only wished to be a good father and to help where he could. One evening, Daniel and Ethan were called again to the royal chamber. The twins rushed forward the moment they entered, wrapping their arms around Ethan and pulling him toward their beds. They begged Daniel to tell another story. He smiled, pulled out his worn book, and began reading. But halfway through, Lyra interrupted and asked for something different. She wanted to hear about Earth. Celine nodded eagerly, saying she wished to know about the world where humans lived. Daniel paused, looking to the Empress for permission. She nodded silently, her eyes sharp but curious. So he told them. He spoke of tall trees that reached for the skies, of rivers that glittered under the sun, of fields full of flowers. He told them of small towns where children ran barefoot, and of city streets glowing at night. The twins listened with wide eyes, their imaginations painting pictures of a world so different from their own. Ethan added small details, telling them about his favorite park, about how rain smelled on the pavement, about how his father once built a little wooden swing for him. The princesses clapped their hands in delight. They asked endless questions. Did humans have moons? Did they see stars the same way? Did they have pets? Daniel laughed softly as he answered, feeling their excitement warm his heart. For him, Earth was home filled with memories of love and loss. For them, it was a dream they had never known. That night, as the girls drifted to sleep, they whispered about wanting to visit Earth someday. The Empress, sitting quietly on her throne, had watched every moment. Her advisors still stood nearby, uneasy about the humans' growing closeness. They whispered warnings that this was dangerous, that the princesses were becoming attached to someone far beneath their station. But she silenced them with a glance. Her daughters were sleeping peacefully now, their faces glowing with dreams, and she would not let anyone take that away. The days continued, and soon Daniel became more than just a visitor at night. The Empress allowed him and Ethan to join the twins during the day in the palace gardens. There they walked among the tall flowers and strange glowing trees. Ethan showed the princesses how to build little towers out of stones. Lyra taught Ethan a game that used glowing orbs floating in the air. Celine showed them how the flowers opened to song. The children laughed together, their voices filling the gardens with joy. The Empress often walked silently behind them, watching. She saw how Daniel gently guided the children, never raising his voice, never forcing them. He showed patience in every action. When Lyra grew frustrated with a puzzle, Daniel knelt beside her, encouraging her to try again. When Celine scraped her knee while running, Daniel cleaned the small wound carefully, speaking calming words. These were small acts, but to the Empress they were powerful. They reminded her that true strength was not always in battle or command, but in care and love. The advisors grew restless. They met in secret, saying that this human janitor was gaining too much influence. They feared what it meant for the Empire if the princesses depended on him. Some wanted him removed quietly, sent back to Earth, or perhaps worse. But none dared act without the Empress's word. And the Empress was not ready to let him go. One night, after the children had fallen asleep, the Empress asked Daniel to remain again. This time she led him to the balcony overlooking the vast city of Aurealis. The towers glittered like stars and ships moved across the skies. She stood tall, her presence commanding, but her voice was quieter than usual when she asked him what he truly wanted. Did he seek wealth, power, favor from the crown? Daniel shook his head. He told her he wanted nothing but to raise Ethan in peace and to help the children who needed comfort. He said that titles and riches meant little if a child's heart was left in fear. The Empress turned her gaze to the horizon, her thoughts heavy. She had built her rule on power and fear, on keeping the galaxy in order through strength. Yet this man with no army and no crown had shown her a truth she had forgotten, that love could calm storms where power could not. She did not speak this aloud, but she carried it in her heart. The following day, the Empress allowed Daniel to teach the palace staff some of his methods. He showed them how to comfort children, how to calm them when fear struck. Servants and guards alike listened, curious about the human simple ways. Soon other children in the palace sought Daniel's help, and he never refused. To him, every child deserved peace. Ethan, meanwhile, grew closer to the princesses. They became like siblings, sharing secrets, laughter, and small adventures within the palace. Together they explored hidden corridors, played games in the gardens, and shared meals under the watchful eyes of guards. The bond between them grew strong, and even the stern guards softened when they heard their laughter. But not all were pleased. Beyond the palace, other rulers and leaders of the empire began to take notice. They sent messages of concern, questioning why the Empress allowed a human janitor such closeness to her heirs. Some hinted at threats, saying it was dangerous to let outsiders influence the royal family. The Empress read these messages in silence, but her decisions did not change. For Daniel, each day felt like a gift. He never imagined that his life as a janitor would lead him here, in the heart of an alien empire, caring for royal children. Yet he remained humble, never forgetting his place, never boasting of what he did. To him it was simple. He was a father, and he would always do what fathers must do. One evening, as the children lay ready for sleep, Lyra whispered to Daniel that she no longer feared the dark. Celine smiled and said she no longer heard the strange noises that once haunted her. Daniel smiled warmly, his heart swelling with pride. The Empress, standing near, felt her eyes grow wet. She turned away quickly so no one would see, but deep inside, she knew her daughters were healing, and it was because of this simple man from Earth. The night closed with silence in the royal chamber. Lyra and Celine slept peacefully. Ethan dozed nearby, and Daniel stood watch for a moment before leaving. The Empress watched him go, her mind filled with thoughts she could not yet share. She knew the galaxy was changing, and perhaps because of this human janitor, her heart was changing too. The days in the citadel of Aurealis grew lighter as time passed. The sound of children's laughter filled the once cold and silent halls. The Empress could see the change clearly. Her daughters no longer carried the heavy eyes of sleepless nights. Their smiles were frequent, and their steps were filled with energy. The servants whispered that the palace seemed warmer, brighter, and even more welcoming. At the heart of this change was Daniel, the human janitor, and his young son, Ethan. Each evening, the twins insisted that Daniel and Ethan be brought to their chambers. The guards had grown used to the sight, though they still looked uneasy. Advisors frowned and exchanged glances, but no one dared defy the Empress's wishes. Lyra and Celine were happiest when Daniel read them stories, when Ethan showed them his simple Earth games, and when all four of them shared moments of play that ignored titles and crowns. For the twins, Daniel was no longer just a visitor. He was a part of their nightly life, a comfort they could not imagine being without. During the day, the Empress often allowed her daughters, Ethan and Daniel, to spend time in the royal gardens. The gardens of Aurealis were vast and strange, filled with glowing flowers and trees whose branches hummed with energy. Daniel watched as the children played hide-and-seek among the glowing bushes. Ethan showed the twins how to skip stones across the crystal ponds, and the princesses taught Ethan how to sing to the blossoms, which opened in response to their voices. Their laughter was a melody that echoed in every corner of the palace. For the Empress, it was both a relief and a quiet wonder. She had fought wars, silenced rivals, and built her rule on strength, yet she could not solve the simple pain of her daughter's sleepless nights. This man from Earth, with no rank, no title, and no weapon, had succeeded. She found herself watching Daniel more closely. His actions were always calm, steady, and filled with patience. When Lyra grew upset, he comforted her with words. When Celine tripped while running, he knelt and cleaned her cut with care. His presence was never forced, never proud. It was always gentle, and yet it was strong. But not all in the palace were pleased. The advisors grew louder in their complaints. They whispered that Daniel's presence threatened the respect of the empire. They said that the princesses were being taught to value commonness over greatness. Some warned that the people might see the Empress as weak for relying on a human janitor. In secret meetings, they plotted ways to remove him. Some suggested sending him back to Earth. Others suggested harsher measures. Yet none dared act without the Empress's command. The Empress listened to their words but did not follow them. She knew her daughters were stronger and healthier now. She saw their smiles, and no argument of politics or pride could outweigh that. Still, she carried the weight of leadership. And in her heart she wondered how long she could protect Daniel from those who despised him. One night, after Daniel had read a story and the children were asleep, the Empress asked him to stay behind. She dismissed the guards and advisors, leaving the chamber quiet. She told him to walk with her to the high balcony. From there, the city stretched endlessly below them, glowing with lights like stars. The air was cool and the silence heavy. She turned to him and asked once more why he risked stepping into her chambers that first night. Daniel answered as he always had. He could not ignore children in fear. He said he had once spent many nights holding his son when storms shook the windows of their small home on Earth. He told her that a parent's duty was simple: to never let a child face fear alone. The Empress stood still, her crown shining under the moons. She was known as a ruler who showed no weakness, yet in that moment she felt something shift. She realized that Daniel's strength did not come from power but from love, and it was a kind of strength the Empire had long forgotten. She did not say it aloud, but she knew she could not let him be taken away. The next days brought more change. The Empress quietly ordered that Daniel be given more freedom in the palace. He was no longer watched as closely, no longer treated only as a servant. Some of the staff began to respect him, especially after he helped other children in the palace who struggled with fear or nightmares. He taught the nurses simple methods like singing gentle songs or playing calm games before bed. His ways spread quietly, and soon even children of the court slept more peacefully. Ethan grew closer to the twins with every passing day. The three children were often seen together, running through the gardens, exploring hidden hallways, or sitting in the library with piles of glowing books. Ethan taught them how to fold paper into shapes, though he had to use the thin sheets the palace provided instead of Earth's paper. Lyra and Celine showed him how to call small glowing creatures from the trees, creatures that danced in the air like fireflies. Their bond grew stronger, and the palace guards, though always near, could not help but smile at their innocence. Yet outside the citadel, voices of doubt rose higher. Leaders of other worlds sent messages, questioning why the Empress allowed a human janitor and his son so close to her heirs. Some called it dangerous, others called it foolish. Rumors began to spread that the Empress was losing her grip, that she had become weak. The Empress read these words with cold eyes but remained silent. She knew what others did not. Her daughter's health was more valuable than any opinion. Still, danger crept closer. One evening, as Daniel walked Ethan back to their quarters, he noticed a shadow following them through the long hall. He kept his calm but tightened his hold on Ethan's hand. Later he told no one, not wishing to bring trouble. But the Empress had eyes everywhere, and soon she learned of it. Her fury burned brighter than the suns of her empire. She summoned her advisors and warned them with a voice like steel that no harm would ever come to the human or his son. Any who disobeyed would face her wrath. The advisors bowed, but inside their fear of Daniel's influence only grew. Meanwhile, the bond between Daniel and the twins grew deeper. One night, when a sudden storm shook the skies above Borealis, Lyra woke trembling. Daniel stayed by her side, telling her softly about storms on Earth, how he and Ethan would listen to the rain and count the thunder together. Celine curled beside her sister, listening as well, and soon both were calm. The Empress, watching from the shadows, felt her chest ache. For years she had been the strongest in the galaxy, but she had never been able to give her daughters this kind of peace. She turned away so no one would see her tears. The following morning, the Empress walked through the gardens with Daniel. For the first time, she asked him about Earth, not just about its landscapes, but about its people, about how fathers and mothers raised their children. Daniel told her simple stories. He spoke of neighbors who cared for each other, of families who gathered around tables, of small joys that built strength greater than any weapon. The Empress listened in silence, her eyes fixed on the horizon, and she felt something she had not felt in many years: hope. The days passed, and Daniel's presence became impossible to deny. He was no longer just a janitor. He was the one who had brought laughter back to the Citadel, who had healed the twins in ways no one else could. The Empress knew the Council and the galaxy would never understand, but in her heart she no longer cared. She had seen the truth, and she would protect it. And so the palace of Borealis continued to shine brighter. Children's laughter filled the air. The Empress walked with quieter steps, and the human janitor who had once entered a forbidden chamber now walked freely, carrying with him the strength of love that no crown could command. The galaxy beyond Borealis had begun to notice the strange changes in the Citadel. Where once the palace was seen as a place of stern power and unshakable control, it was now whispered that laughter could be heard in the halls. Word had spread that the Empress's daughters, who had long been sleepless and frail, were now strong and joyful. And the center of this transformation was not a grand healer, not a priest, not a mighty warrior, but a human janitor named Daniel and his son Ethan. Across worlds, people asked how such a thing could be possible. Within the Citadel, Life continued in its quiet rhythm. Each night, Daniel and Ethan visited the royal chambers, where Lyra and Celine awaited them eagerly. They had become inseparable, the twins and the human boy, their bond stronger than the warnings of advisors or the whispers of the court. Daniel would read them stories, tell them about Earth, or show them small games that made them laugh. Ethan often joined in, his young voice mixing with theirs in giggles and songs. The chamber that had once been filled with restless cries was now filled with peace. But beyond the peace of those nights, storms brewed in the Empire. Some council members believed the Empress had grown weak. They said she was distracted, her focus lost because of a human who had no place near the throne. They sent messages filled with warnings and threats. They claimed the people would lose respect, that enemies would see weakness. The Empress listened, but she did not act as they wanted. She had seen her daughters healed by Daniel's care, and she would not undo what had been done. The Empress knew the time would come when she would need to make a choice. Either she would defend Daniel openly, risking anger from the council, or she would give in to their demands and send him away. She thought long on this, often standing alone on her balcony looking out over the glowing city. She remembered the first night he entered her chamber, unafraid, guided only by the cry of children. That memory weighed heavily on her heart. Meanwhile, Daniel remained humble. He did not ask for titles or riches. He continued to work each day, polishing the crystal floors, repairing the glowing lamps, and sweeping the endless halls. To him, what mattered most was Ethan's happiness and the smiles of Lyra and Celine. When they laughed, when they slept peacefully, he felt his purpose was fulfilled. He never dreamed that his actions had begun to shape the Empire itself. One evening, ambassadors from distant worlds arrived at the Citadel. They came to discuss trade, alliances, and military matters. But when they entered the grand halls, they were surprised by the stories they heard. Servants whispered about the human who had calmed the princesses. Guards told of the nights filled with laughter. And when the ambassadors were granted audience with the Empress, they were astonished to see the princesses healthy, bright-eyed, and strong. Lyra herself spoke to one ambassador, telling him that she was no longer afraid of the dark because of Daniel's stories. Celine proudly said she could sleep without fear because of the games Daniel had taught her. The ambassadors exchanged glances, shocked that the royal heirs spoke so openly of a human janitor. Some were offended, others curious, but the Empress did not hide it. She declared before them that Daniel had done what none of her empire's power had achieved. He had healed her daughters not with wealth, not with machines, not with armies, but with simple care. She told them that strength was not only found in war or rule, but also in love. Her words spread quickly across the galaxy. Some mocked her. Others admired her. For the first time, many began to look at humanity with new eyes, wondering what hidden strength the small species might carry. And in the Citadel, Daniel remained the same. He was not changed by the sudden attention. He still mopped the floors, still told stories, still guided Ethan with patience. Yet trouble still lingered. The advisors, angry that the Empress had spoken so openly, gathered in secret. They plotted to remove Daniel, believing that without him the Empire would return to its old ways. One dark night, they sent men to corner him as he returned to his quarters with Ethan. Daniel noticed them, his heart tightening. He placed Ethan behind him, ready to protect his son with nothing but his body. But before harm could come, the Empress herself appeared, her guards at her side. Her voice was like thunder as she ordered the attackers seized. She declared that anyone who threatened the human or his son threatened her crown itself. From that night on, none dared raise a hand against him. The bond between Daniel, Ethan, and the twins grew stronger still. Lyra and Celine saw Ethan as a brother, and they saw Daniel as more than a helper. They saw him as family. The Empress, though she never spoke the words aloud, began to feel the same. She realized that Daniel had not only healed her daughters, but had also softened her own heart. For years she had ruled with iron and silence. Now she found herself remembering what it meant to be a mother, not just a ruler. One night, as the children slept peacefully, the Empress stood with Daniel once more on the balcony. The city glowed beneath them and the stars shone above. She told him that the galaxy would never understand why she trusted him, but she no longer cared. She said that the greatest lesson she had learned was not from battles or victories, but from the quiet courage of a father who refused to ignore the cries of children. Daniel listened silently, humbled by her words. As time passed, the story of the Empress, her daughters, and the human janitor became a legend told across the stars. People said that in the greatest palace of the galaxy, the sound of children's laughter had returned because of a man with no title. They said that the Empress, known for her iron rule, had once bowed her head in gratitude to a janitor. And they said that the empire itself had been changed not by force but by love. For Lyra and Selene, the nights were no longer filled with fear. They grew stronger, wiser, and kinder. They carried with them the lessons Daniel had taught, and those lessons shaped the way they saw the galaxy. For Ethan, the palace became a second home, and the princesses became his sisters in spirit. And for Daniel, his life had found meaning beyond anything he had imagined. He remained simple, humble, and steady, but he had left a mark on an empire. And so the citadel of Aurealis stood brighter than before. The twin moons shone down on the towers, and inside children slept peacefully. A human father, once thought small and unimportant, had shown that true strength came not from crowns or armies, but from the love that calms fear and brings peace to the hearts of children.